do a little bit before lunch on what I call the consequences. Now, when it comes to consequences, I work with Drager's material all the time. He had logical and natural consequences. I'm sure you're familiar with those. You're running down, you don't look where you're going, and you bump into a tree. That is called natural consequences. If you don't watch where you're going, logical consequences is something that is logically moves from whatever you've done wrong. If you graffiti a wall, for example, instead of writing, 45 graffiti sentences, the writing teacher is going to say, why would you use writing as punishment? I'm trying to teach the joys of writing and you're using it. You logically would clean up the wall that you get to. So that's logical consequences, and I was teaching that and teaching that. I would give parenting workshops as a counselor for parents, and I remember using Drager's book, and the parents would often ask, what kids don't pick up their toys? And I could hear Drager's now. He would say, it's very simple. He'd always say, it's very simple. He said, you just ask them to pick up the toys they want to keep. It worked so well. And of course, then they look up at you, well, what happened? Well, the toys you have to pick up, you simply put in a box and put away, and guess what they're down to? The toys they're going to take care of. I mean, I use that all the time. I just loved it. Couldn't wait for parents to ask me about toys because I had that perfect. Then we adopted 2 kids, ages 6 and 7 when they came to live with us, so we knew the world was going to be exciting, and it was. Very much. They had been in foster homes for a number of years, and so I remember when we had toys everywhere. The whole town turned out and gave the kids toys, and toys. And one day I said to Susie, just pick up the toys you want to keep. She looked up at me and says, I don't want any of these toys. I mean, she came to live with us. She had a little box of ribbons. That was all she had in her life. Material things meant nothing to her. And she's 40 and they still mean nothing to her. Now, my leverage was gone because it was so logical to me. And then you wonder what happened. So, with life's experiences, I'm thinking if I'm going to do some of the consequences, I want to have something that at least is going to remain viable as a way in which we can work with this. But forcing then somebody to pick up that is you get the coercion and then you get the punishment. So how can I do away with all punishments when it comes to consequences to this? So I've tried to develop what I call a professional relationship model. I have consequences, a professional relationship model. And what I'm trying to do is to parallel that with other professions like the physician-patient, the lawyer-client, the investment counselor-investor, that relationship. Now that's a relationship, a fiduciary relationship of trust and care. Trust and care. Can't get better when you're trying to help other people with this. But the ethics of that is that professional is always acting in the best interest of the person they're serving. Very simple professional ethics. Very simple concept. Now, why can't we move that into our relationship with our students? That same professional relationship, that professional mindset is that I'm here acting in your best interest. Everything we will do will be in your best interest. And how do you develop a language where students will perceive that I'm always acting in your best interest? Is that hard to do? That's really hard to do. Now, I think we can argue that by the rules we are developing around the 10 basic principles, that I'm acting with your best interest because these aren't my rules. These are the rules in the country that we live. This is this is stage 5 of Kohlberg. This allows you permanent value, and it helps you move to a responsibility as away from an obedience model. So I think we can argue pretty well that by using not my rules based on my bias, on my prejudices, but we're basing these on living together in this democratic community, I can make the argument, I think I'm trying to act in your best interest. Now, the next step is when somebody screws up. How can I use a language where that student is always perceiving I'm acting in his or her best interest? Okay, I have to first stop doing 2 things that we normally do. And the first thing I have to stop doing is lecturing. How many times have I told you? I told you if you've done that, remember all those words that come out of our mouth. And the second thing, which is even harder, and that is to accept that student exactly where they are and move from there on. Now, how does this get into the professional relationship? You go to your physician, you're coughing and hacking and all this kind of thing. Hey, doc, do I have cancer? Do I have chemo? Whatever you're trying to say. And the doctor says, look, how many times have I told you to stop smoking? And you don't listen to me, you continue to lecture. You're now rolling your eyes. You say, look, can you take me from exactly where I am? I made some stupid decisions in my life, but here I am. I think I might be ill. Would you stop your lectures and would you get on with your tests or whatever you're going to do to help me? You're a lawyer. You knew if you did that, you'd be in trouble and you'd be here. How many times? Your investment counselor's the good one. If you only made more money. Remember that, the lecture you get? If you made more money, we could do now more with you. And you say, hey, this is all I'm making. Can you help me from exactly where I am? Now, I'm moving that into our relationship that we have with the students. Why do we always have to sit there as judge, jury, and jailer? Stop the judging. Now, it doesn't mean we agree with what they've done. They know that, probably. This is really obvious. What they need is someone on their side now, after they've messed up. They need somebody acting in their best interest when they get there. Now, normally the judge, jury, and jailer, we play out, when somebody messes up, the criminal justice model. We basically criminalize what they've done, and then we move into the justice system with so many days detention or whatever that we have. That's the recipe of folks. That's your stimulus response theory. That's your extrinsic model. How do we move into a model where then we take that student from exactly where they are? So that's the mindset I'm going for. Now, I say, what's the language of you? I give you a couple of don'ts. Stop the lectures. Stop the judging. You take that student from exactly where they are. The first words out of your mouth are going to be in the form of a question. A question. Every good professional starts with a question that they have. They don't know enough yet to know where to help you, how to help you, and so forth. Now, in the front of the book, I have like 18 nevers or something like that, and I developed those sort of when I was teaching ed psych. I would say to students, never, ever, ever do this because it never, ever, ever works. And so I put some of these down. They say, one of the nevers is you never ask a student why. Because it focuses on the student. Why did you? Always ask a student what happened. I see you're having a bad day. Would you like to talk about it? You see how you separated the student from the incident. Just as we've separated the rules from us, you have to separate the student from the incident. Now, remember I said if there is some power to the rules you develop, separate yourself from the rules. It's the same with the student. Giving them some power, you're separating them from what they had done. You're looking at them as another human being. You're showing that much respect for that, because you're not talking about the incident. Okay, now the student begins doing the talking. Or let's say they don't talk. Then your response is, I see you'd rather not talk about this now, would later be better. When do you think we could get together? Oh, you talk about respect. But the operative word is still there. We're going to talk about this. So we're not talking about anyone getting away, but we're talking about respecting where the student is now. They may not have it together. They may not trust you. They may not think you're on his or her side or something. So there's a response that you can get if someone doesn't talk. Now, let's say they begin talking. Let's say they're lying through their teeth. I care that they feel they had to lie. You know why people lie. They lie out of fear with this. They lie out of mistrust. I mean, a lot of people lie for this. But I'm going to hear them out with this. You didn't have your homework, the dog ate it. You know, some people can't get past that. What do you mean the dog ate it? It isn't anything. A nice response to that is you can say, the dog ate it. Well, that's a nice metaphor. I've heard before, and it's probably because you didn't have a chance to do this for this. And so you're going to say something like, when do you think you'll be able to get it done? Do you need some more help with that? Is there something you don't understand about your homework? So you move right into that professional model that you move into and stay away from the judgment. So whatever they're going to say, they own it, because the person doing the talking is the person that's developing and experiencing the responsibility. So that's the importance of their doing the talking. That's how you move to an intrinsic reproach, and you get it, the responsibility from you, which is the obedience model. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, by the way, I'm going to talk about just two things when it comes to consequences. First, I'm going to talk about what do we need to do now. Real simple. What do we need to do now? And around that, the first thing we're going to talk about is restitution. How can we put things back whole again? Now, kids in trouble need somebody to help them to learn responsibility, to make it back. Somebody does the graffiti and they may need some clean up the wall or whatever it would be for this. Or if they spill something on the floor, or two kids fighting as you're talking with them. What do we need to do now? How can we get you back together again? This kind of a thing. How can we get you back to class? That's what we need to do now, is how we can resolve this thing here. Now, besides restitution, which is a great legal concept that we can bring into this thing, and that is making things whole again, is what about feelings? How can we put feelings back? And there may be an apology. And those are the two things where I'm going to talk about when a student messes up. What do we need to do now? Restitution, how can we get it back? And what about feelings? Are we going to have to deal with someone's feelings here? The second thing we're going to talk about after what do we need to do now will be, what can we learn from this? What about next time? Now, all of the things we say to the students are in the form of a question. One question after another, but these questions are laced with ideas. Have you thought about doing this next time? What do you think about doing that? What do you think would happen if this and this? You see how that works? It doesn't mean you can't plant those ideas, but it all has to be in the form of a question that you would have. That's where the students are learning responsibility, when they are the ones doing the thinking. I'm suggesting we should be the ones doing the leading with what lawyers call leading questions that are, of course, not in this one, but for educators, we should be developing the leading questions that we would have. And I think that's our responsibility as the students then learn this. I think all consequences should be designed, instead of pushing kids out, they should be designed to keep kids in school. I think that's what consequences should be designed for. And most consequences are designed to push kids out. How can we develop resources and consequences to keep kids in school and teach them the behavior they're going to need to work within that school environment? Okay. Is he saying that regardless of what the student does, you got to keep the student in school? And the answer is no. There's going to be a time when we have really exhausted our resources in trying to keep some students in school. They simply have behaviors that we just can't figure out, or we don't have the resources in which to work with, you know. So when the time comes and that student is sitting with the principal and the principal with the student and family, whatever it is, the principal begins something like, well, you know, we've really tried, you know, to help you stay in school, but we've really exhausted our resources. We're out of ideas. However, when you feel that you can work within the resources that we have, we would love to have you back in school with that. So the kid is now out on the streets, and somebody says, I hear you've been kicked out of school. The student said, no. They've exhausted their resources. Okay. All the difference in the world. Resources are over here, I'm the principal here, and this is the student and the parents. How do you develop a language where that student feels, I am always acting in his or her best interest? You've got to separate that student. You have to respect the individuality of that student, not agree with what they have done. Separate that, but respect that individual. and deal with what we will call the resources. The deal with what happened in the it. Deal with rules that I didn't invent. In fact, you wouldn't want to say it to student, but you're thinking if you don't like this school, you won't like living in America. Because this is basically a microcosm of the United States. Again, I'm not suggesting we say that. That would tend to flaunt it. But this is how it's coming out, is that we're trying to teach people how to live in a free society, how to live responsibly in a free society. Students will never learn responsibility until they have something to be responsible for. And what they have to be responsible for in this model is what is called their rights. They have to be responsible. Now, what are those responsibilities? The responsibilities is to the other members of the school. And here are their welfare needs. Health and safety, property loss and damage, as you get into that. And that's the rationale, and that's where you get into this balancing effect. Okay, that's all of the language that we'll be playing over and over and over again as we get to this. There are the rules, and then there are the consequences as we get into that. And that's where I'm trying to move to that. I was a building principal. She was an all-girls school, high school in Portland. She was the vice principal of high school, and she, for 18 years, had been the administrator, what she called the hammer in the office. And she said after taking the class, about a few months later, she came back. She said, you know, this is incredible. She says, I went back and I looked at myself now as an educational resource person instead of as an assistant principal, the judge, jury, and that you get into. And she says, the minute I perceived myself as that, everybody started looking at me like this. And when the teachers would send students to me and all, and we would talk about things and all, it was just a completely different relation we have. And nobody was afraid to come see me anymore because I was on their side, and they knew that. Periodically, I would start to get into my judgmental mode that I had used before, and she said I could see it on the students' faces. It just, you know, the eyes and everything, you know, you're not on my side with this. And just a minute. She said, can we start over again? And then she'd start into this other, and she says it made all the difference. In fact, one girl admitted she was on drugs. We got her in a drug rehab program, and 3 days later, two of her friends came in and said, we're on drugs too, can we go too? And so on. But when you can engender that much trust, when kids think you are always acting in their best interest, it's a completely different relationship that you have. But it takes language to get there. You stop the judging, you stop the autocratic talk, you stop the lectures, you start assuming those kids as young as they are and looking at them as a citizen, within your classroom. Citizen with rights and responsibilities. And the language just changes. Instead of the do nots, you just simply remember them. The example I have in the book, some of you might have read, we had an elementary school in a little town in Oregon. I mean, most of the kids were on their lunch programs and everything, so it was a very poor part of the state. And the bus driver came in, the principal, about 3 weeks after they started, and said, there's something really different about school this year. And she said, what do you mean? He says, well, I was out there waiting for the bus, and these two boys were chasing this girl, Said, that's been going on for centuries, boys chasing girls in about second or third grade. And all of a sudden the girl stopped and said to the boys, you can't do this to me. This is health and safety. And the boy stopped and ran the other way. He says, boys never stop when a girl says you can't do that to me. And all of a sudden, what's his health and safety stuff? And, when she said, you can't do this to me, she said, I say you can't do it. But the moment she threw in the words health and safety, it was like the student body standing behind her, saying this is not acceptable behavior. And when you have the student body, that all has the same language, it's a powerful thing. And what I had no idea is how powerful a cognitive approach could be. When we get so used to the other approach, fear don't get out of control. But kids that do have this language, they really use it as a way to advocate for themselves. And the bullying that goes on, the tattletales, they just plummet, because they're the ones that speak up.